It's all quiet in the underground bunker. Doors closed, locks bolted. But the Great One isn't just resting on his laurels. He's making sure your weekend is even better by giving you his best. This is the best of Mark Levin.
The president is, I think, back on his way to Washington, unless he was in Washington already. He's got a lot more energy than most people, certainly me. He was in Florida at the Doral, his resort. Okay. And there's a House Republican event, their annual event, where they go over issues and so forth. A couple of things that were interesting, I thought, during that press event that you heard and I heard. Number one, the Putin call. Putin wants to be helpful. Well, Putin's been giving the Iranian regime intelligence on where our bases are and where our forces are, so they could try and hit them. So he wants to be helpful. Putin is a snake. He's a mass murderer. He's an assassin. He's a snake. He can't be trusted. He sees the writing on the wall and he wants to be helpful. Well, that's kind of absurd, but okay. And then number two, this war, my understanding was, it would go on 4 more weeks, 4 to 6 more weeks, and I've been watching and listening very, very carefully to the President, to the Secretary of Defense, to the Secretary of State, and that was the message, certainly up to last night, was it not, Mr. Producer? And now it's an excursion. Now, that's okay. We can call it whatever we want, but we have a massive force structure there, and they're still hammering away, as are the Israelis, as are some of the Arab countries now. So I do think, far short from a quote-unquote democracy project, that we really need to think through very carefully how, once the overt military activity is done, how the rest of this will be treated. Because these Islamists, even though they're defeated effectively on the battlefield, they still exist throughout the society there. The secret police still exist. And the regular police still exist. And the imams still exist, and so forth. So that's all very daunting, very complicated, and I don't expect us to be able to fix all of it. But that said, we certainly can't leave the condition for a regime, after all of this, after all these decades, after all this fantastic action on the part of the president and our military and our diplomatic corps and so forth and so on, just another face, just another, Islamist, 7th century, mass murdering, genocidal maniac who wants to redo what they've done. And we have to be very careful about that. As a sort of 100-day or 120-day government that would then work its way into something more like a republic or something of that sort, because he said he's been out of the country for a long time. I will say the first Khomeini was out of the country for a very, very long time, and then he came back. It's really, what do the people have in mind? And I heard Dennis Ross on Fox, I forget where it was, talk about 2 individuals in their 80s who he would recommend. Dennis Ross has been all over the map when it comes to the Middle East. He's not a bad person, but he hasn't had the kind of foresight that some of the other people have had, including the president. So I don't know about an 84-year-old, 86-year-old reformists who were put in prison, who yet had been part of the... I don't know about all that. I do know that the Shah's son has enormous popularity. I can tell you online, and people who talk to me, and I'm not really pushing anybody. You'll notice that a lot of people have interviewed the Shah on radio and TV. I haven't interviewed anybody because I don't really think it's my place. What I've supported is the overthrow of this regime and the liberation of the Iranian people, and the protection of the American people and the rest of the world from these maniacs, their nuclear weapons, their ballistic missiles, and their terrorism. That's been my view. I think this has to be done right rather than quickly. I don't think we need a whole mass, a number of troops on the ground. I don't think that would be wise at all. I don't think the American people would be excited about that. But there are things that can be done, and we shall see. I guess the third point that I didn't mention that I thought was interesting is when he was asked if J.D. Vance, the vice president, and he were on the same page when it came to this. Didn't you find that interesting, Mr. Producer? He confirmed what a lot of people already knew, which was J.D. was not that gung-ho about going in, less so, say, than him and the others. But my take on it was, once the decision was made, he backed it, obviously. And but I do notice his absence from a lot of these events. Maybe that's intentional because of security reasons. Maybe it's for other reasons. I don't know. But it's obvious. And I'd be a fool not to comment on that. So those are my comments on this. My view is that this mission needs to be finished when it's finished. The sooner the better, but time should not be the motivating factor. And as I understood it, and as they made clear, the administration and the president, the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, this is condition-based, not time-based, conditioned on whether the conditions are such that that overt or affirmative military action of the sort that we're seeing is to end. He also said, I believe earlier today, that he would be consulting our Israeli partners as well. Probably a good idea, since they're right in the neighborhood there, and they have an enormous amount of intelligence on what goes on in that region, on that part of the world. I'm not going to sit here and speculate. I've given you my opinion. You've heard what the president said. I always worry, not so much about this president or this administration, but I always worry that after something like this, we lose the peace. Donald Trump's going to be president for 3 more years. I wish it would be longer, but that's the way it works. And it's essential that we not lose the peace. There's not going to be another Donald Trump. I just don't see one on the horizon. There's never been a Donald Trump before. And he is historic and iconic in so many ways. But we have to be very careful. Very careful that once we pull out and pull back, that there isn't a vacuum created and that enemy or another enemy just fills right in and we're back to square one. We're back to square one. That, to me, would be utterly unacceptable. I'm going to spend some time this evening, if you're wondering, talking about what took place in New York, the ISIS attack by 2 young immigrants into our country, one 19, one 18. The response of the mayor of New York, which was appalling. And my great concern, this is just the beginning of this sort of thing. We've already seen some of this. With the attempted execution of 2 National Guardsmen, one successful, one almost successful. With the murder of those 2 staffers working at the Israeli embassy, those 2 young people murdered in cold blood, with the horrific level of violence that is being urged by certain imams in certain communities, and the effort by the Democrats to prevent their deportation and denaturalization. And here we are in the middle of this battle, where there's report after report today that there's a great concern that the Iranians pre-positioned hit squads all over the world, including in our country. And, of course, we're vulnerable to that because the Biden regime kept the border wide open, as did the Democrats who run the Democrat Party in the House and the Senate right now, Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. And their answer is to try and destroy ICE, which has as its responsibility to track down terrorists or would-be terrorists or suspected terrorists, among others, and remove them. And they're at war with ICE. And they lie about ICE grabbing citizens off the street and so forth. They make mistakes, and part of that, if not most of it, is due to the fact that local law enforcement are ordered to stand down and not assist them. with the identity of individuals, the location of individuals. So they're having to do it from a federal perspective, not a local perspective. So they are obstructed intentionally to make their job more difficult by Democrat mayors, Democrat attorneys general, Democrat DAs, Democrats, governors. And so they are going to make it as inconvenient as possible for you to get on and off an airline, on and off a railroad, because TSA has responsibility on all overland transportation. Those poor people are not getting paid at all. The Democrats are getting paid. They're not getting a cent. The Coast Guard's not getting paid. And the Coast Guard, just so you understand, is not just civilian. Actually, it is a military part of the Navy that when we're not in sort of military action, they have many civilian responsibilities. But they are important in terms of military activity. They are important in terms of preventing the importation of massive amounts of drugs. They're not getting paid either. They're not getting paid either. So ICE is under attack. TSA's not paid. The Coast Guard's not paid. FEMA's not paid. And Hakeem Jeffries wants you to believe it's because of the Republicans. The Republicans keep pushing bills and trying to pass them. And the Democrats in the Senate, with the threat of a filibuster, keep blocking them until they destroy ICE, which is necessary, of course, to get rid of illegal aliens, especially criminal illegal aliens, but not exclusively, and to keep terrorists out of our country. That's their response. Oh, and to try and get a War Powers Act passed, a resolution passed, with various approaches, now 5 they want to throw up there, to prevent our military from finishing its mission. That's where the Democrat Party is, ladies and gentlemen. The price of gasoline, as I said the other night, as I'm telling you now, the price of gasoline under the Democrats was much higher than it is already, and it would be even higher if those EPA regulations stayed in place and the lack of production existed as the Democrats insisted under this rubric of climate change. So you'd have nuclear weapons for sure, plus gasoline priced like it is in California, through the roof, if the Democrats were in charge.
Mark Levin.
Making your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
The only one who can defeat our mission in Iran is us. Is us. The goal is to defeat this enemy. What does that mean? Take out their Air Force, their Navy, their leadership, and leave? Well, that's not defeating an enemy. That's defeating their Air Force, their Navy, and their leadership. They have secret police. They have an entire army, infantry. They have all this sort of stuff that's there. And so it will regenerate if we leave the vacuum. This is not an argument for a democracy project. It's not an argument for hundreds of thousands of troops. It's not an argument for any of that. But I wrote a piece over at Fox News Digital. I think it was published a week or 10 days ago. And I said we need to be thinking about what's going to happen once we are victorious over these elements of the Iranian regime. And I don't think we're giving it enough thought, quite frankly. Now, maybe the president is, and maybe his people are, but we, the people, and certainly the media, what's to come? Now, the prince has said, look, I'll be an interim leader for 100 days. He put out an entire plan. It's on the internet. Looks like a very good plan to me. And there are others potentially, I suppose. But if we're going to allow the price of a gallon of gasoline be determinative on what I thought was a conditions-based military operation, not a time-based military operation, we could lose. Not even lose the peace. We could lose the war after our forces withdraw from that area, which means all of this would be for naught. And I don't want it all to be for naught. I want us to be victorious. And we can be victorious. It matters the government that's there. When we defeated Japan, which you'll remember they attacked us on December 7th, 1941, we demanded an unconditional surrender. And they sent word through emissaries to the Truman administration that they would accept the surrender, but not unconditional. And Truman said, no, unconditional. We didn't fight like this and lose all these men. And the horrors of the Japanese government for some conditional surrender. It's unconditional or nothing. And they refused. So we dropped the first atomic bomb. And they refused again. So they dropped the second atomic bomb, a completely different atomic bomb. And that was it. That's all we had, 2 atomic bombs. So they're hoping they would work. I'm not suggesting dropping nuclear missiles and so forth, but that's not my point. This enemy has no Navy, has no Air Force. Their missiles are being destroyed. It's been a fantastic, spectacular military operation and campaign. But the end goal has to be sure that it cannot regenerate. Remember how this started? The president promised the Iranian people that he would come to their rescue. And people are saying the Iranian people need to be able to rise up. There's no question about that. But their army is still heavily armed. They still have tanks. They still have armored personnel carriers. They still have the equivalent of bazookas and automatic weapons and on and on and on. I have to hope that we're arming the opposition there. I hope we are. I hope we're doing other things. I really do. But if we lose what we've done here as a result of complaints about the cost of a gallon of gasoline 7-8 months before the midterm elections, what a disaster and horror that would be. I heard somebody on TV say we never replace a government after a victory and tell them what to do. It's a lot of ignorance. Japan is what I was pointing out. We certainly did determine what that government would look like. We wrote their constitution. We had to approve who took over. We didn't fight and lose so many men to leave it to chance. And we ought not leave this to chance, ladies and gentlemen. We must not. If the purpose of the battle, the purpose of military action was needed in the first place, and it was, then you can't leave it to chance. You just can't. Again, to stress, I'm not pushing a democracy project of any kind. I'm not pushing anything other than we take the time to really figure out how we want this to be handled. And as I say, maybe the president and his people already have, and they choose not to convey it. But I hear an awful lot of pressure, endless news reports on the price of gasoline. We didn't have endless news reports on the price of gasoline when it was far more expensive than it is today as a result of climate change ideology and religion. When they were shutting down leases, shutting down drilling sites, shutting down federal lands, making it difficult, very difficult, to produce oil domestically and to refine it. We didn't have those charts popping up showing us day by day how much the price of gasoline was going up. It's almost $5 a gallon for a premium. Almost $5 a gallon. And they drove up the price of automobiles by like $4,000 or $5,000. Remember all that? The expenses were enormous. And this is temporary. It's temporary. There's plenty of oil. But the world is worried about what happens to the Straits, where 20% of the oil passes. Not 20% of our oil, but there's a world market out there. That would be temporary, especially if the Iranian regime and its entrails were eliminated. The Straits would be wide open. I'm just cautioning you now because I heard almost a complete change in tone. It could be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks to we're pretty much done. You know, we'll be out of there soon enough. And we'll see. By the way, a footnote for you folks out there. As you know, I worked for President Reagan for 8 years, and I worked for several cabinet members, including the Attorney General of the United States. We've had this discussion before. I've never written a book, an essay, a tweet. I've never said anything behind this microphone or on TV about any of the confidential discussions I had with any of those officials. Not once. In all the years I've been doing this. I am deeply troubled when people talk to the President of the United States. Either he seeks them out or they seek him out. And then they go to Politico or the newspaper pages of the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or Axios, wherever they go. And they start talking about their discussions with the President of the United States. They want to pat themselves on the head. They want to pat other people on the head. Look at me, look at me. I find it very disloyal. And a president and cabinet secretaries, they have a right to confidentiality when they're seeking information or when somebody is providing it unsolicited. It's very troubling to me. It very much is. And so when I see names attached to that, I cringe. It's bad enough that you have anonymous leakers who are basically traitors trying to persuade the president or push the agenda in one direction or the other. That's bad enough. When you have people saying the president did this because I told him and I told him this and you got to get him on a certain day with a certain weather in front of a certain sandwich or whatever they say. That is unacceptable to me.
Mark Levin.
You're listening to the best of Mark Levin.
You know, when you look at Europe, America, you can see the ruling class elitists. You know, I call them elitists, not elite, because they're actually not elite. They claim to be elitists. Snobs. Well, they let down each and every one of their countries, except Hungary. Now, by ruling class elitists, I mean the elected politicians, the bureaucrats, the media, and academia. They let down every one of these countries. They refuse to have an honest discussion about opening their borders to Islamists and what impact that would have. Again, I said Islamists. I'm not talking about the normal sort of immigration process that's managed and people from all points of the planet, they come, they try to get in, they might be Muslim, they might be Jewish, they might be Christian, they might be nothing, they might be Buddhist, they might be Hindu, they might be nothing again, who knows? And there's a process for it, a vetting process, but that's not what's happened, is it? The systems have been overwhelmed. For two reasons. Number one, the people coming overwhelm the system and have been encouraged to conquer the West. Europe being the weakest, and now the United States. And we know this to be true because there have been many essays and books written about this by Islamists, planners, strategists, imams, activists, whatever you want to call them. But number two, the ruling class elitists in these countries. They allowed it. In fact, they encouraged it. Their media lied about it. Either silent, hid it, or just lied about it. Academia is all for it. Have you noticed academia in the free world hates the free world? No, they want their academic freedom and free speech, but not for anybody else. Not for anybody else. But it's the politicians, really. What we know by observing Europe is that the labor parties, the liberal parties, that is the left in Europe, the Marxists, effectively, they allowed it to happen and they wanted it to happen, as well as very weak opposition, so-called conservative parties. The Tory party in England has been very weak for a long time. Same with its equivalent in Germany. In France, it barely exists. And when it has a good leader, they try and throw that person in prison. And here in the United States, our media are horrendous. Our ruling class elitists are horrendous. And by this, I mean the Democrat Party is the party of the Marxists and the Islamists. They had open borders. They said they couldn't close them. Trump comes in and slams them shut. By the way, so did Kristi Noem, who gets credit for nothing for some reason. And now, of course, they've shut down the TSA. They've shut down funding for the Coast Guard, for the Secret Service, for FEMA, because they effectively want to defund ICE. Or neuter ICE at this point. That means they call these things reform, but they want to prevent ICE from deporting what they believe will be their future constituency. And one of the main things they oppose are ICE agents at polling precincts. And they want to outlaw that. And so there's the giveaway right there. They want to outlaw it. Why? Illegal aliens are hanging around polling places on voting day. Isn't that a problem? Why would they be hanging around the voting precinct on election day, ladies and gentlemen? Why? Because they're encouraged to do so by Democrats. That's why. Democrats. Cheating. Can you prove that, Mark? You don't make it possible to prove it in every case. The Democrats don't want their voting rolls cleaned up. They literally file lawsuits against the federal government. It's a matter of federal law, by the way. They file lawsuits against the federal government to try and prevent them. Now, they lose them. But, of course, these lawsuits take time, don't they? So these ruling class elitists, Democrats, but then you have Republican types like Tillis and his ilk. They give them cover, like Lisa Murkowski and her ilk. There's a guy from Indiana, too. I forget his name. Young. He's another loser. This guy, Young, complete loser. There's a guy out of Utah. He's another loser. You know, we should be getting conservatives out of Utah. And we mostly do. You got Lee, and you got Jim Banks. He's great, too. But then you have these two Nimrods, reprobates. But they want this to happen. They want us to turn into what you see in Europe. Really, for a temporary reason, because the Islamists vote Democrat. And they'll keep voting Democrat until they destroy not only the Republican Party, but the Democrat Party. Then they take over the system. That's how it works. That's what's going on in Europe right now. It's what's going on in New York City and Dearborn, Michigan, and other parts of our country. Now, why am I getting into this? I want to go back to the truth about this Gracie Mansion bomb attempt, because this is illustrative of exactly what I'm talking about. An attempt to cover it up by the media, by the first Muslim mayor of New York. I call him that because he calls himself that. But he's actually the first Marxist Muslim mayor of New York as well. And over at National Review, the editors point out, on Saturday, an internet troll named Jack Lang staged an anti-Muslim protest in front of Gracie Mansion. Currently the residence of New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Both its title, Stop the Islamic Takeover of New York City, and scheduled main event, a pig roast, made its nature as an attention-getting provocation clear enough. Lang expected angry counter-protesters, and he received them in due course. What neither he nor any of the peaceful protesters, the counter-protesters, in attendance, expected, was for two young men, identified in reports as Imar Balat, age 18, and Ibrahim Qayyumi, age 19, to rush forward, shout, Allahu Akbar, and hurl improvised explosive devices into the crowd. They didn't throw them at Gracie Mansion. They didn't throw them at the mayor and his wife who weren't there. They threw it into the crowd. The bombs, filled with bolts and screws, thankfully failed to detonate, and the two men were immediately apprehended by a fast-moving NYPD. There's no doubt as to their motivations. Both men spoke freely and unrepentantly to police at the scene, proudly claiming inspiration from ISIS and stating they had intended their terrorist atrocity to be, quote, bigger than Boston, unquote, referencing, of course, the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing that killed 3 and injured scores more. Only the incompetence of the bombers prevented Saturday from turning into one of the darkest days in recent New York history. Yet one would know none of this were one to go only by the headlines and framing devices. The mainstream media, that is the Democrat left-wing crooked media, have consistently used to explain this story to American readers who, like it or not, primarily consume their news in headline rather than article form. NBC New York got an early start on what would quickly become an overwhelming trend, telling a curiously non-committal story over the weekend, quote, multiple arrests made after suspicious devices found outside Gracie Mansion, home of Mayor Zohran Mamdani, during anti-Muslim rally and counter-protest, quote, unquote. The Daily News headline whimpered, quote, protesters throw smoking improvised device, clash with Jack Lang pig roast at anti-Islamification rally at Gracie Mansion, quote, unquote. The tone-setting New York Times itself wrestled with curiosity-tortured loquations. Smoking jars of metal and fuses thrown at protests near mayor's home. It's impossible not to notice that all these headlines, or countless others from similarly situated media outlets, are carefully crafted to avoid stating a politically inconvenient truth. Islamic terrorists came horrifyingly close to detonating bombs in a crowd of protesters. Instead, our attention is directed toward the hateful nature of the rally, and readers are asked to fill in the missing narrative gaps with their own imaginations instead. On Tuesday, the sugarcoating of the obvious, that homegrown, self-radicalized jihadis had targeted a protest and nearly murdered who knows how many people outside Gracie Mansion, had moved well into parody. CNN led in the morning with a widely mocked and subsequently deleted tweet, framing the acts of Balat and Qayyumi as a soft-focused human interest story. Quote, 2 Pennsylvania teenagers crossed into New York City Saturday morning for what could have been a normal day, enjoying the city during abnormally warm weather. That's how the piece began. You'll never believe what happened next. The pattern at that point is clear. The media are consistently choosing not to report on the attack outside Gracie Mansion honestly, instead employing all of their creative writing skills to craft craven, hold on here. Do you get these commercials that pop up, Mr. Producer, on your screen? Craven headlines that aim to deceive by omission and suggestion. Elected Democrats, too, have resorted to this. First, it was former Comptroller Brad Lander, this guy's a complete putz, who on Saturday afternoon, after the names and motives of both suspects were already widely known, tweeted, happen to know our mayor and first lady are safe. They weren't even there, but horrified that there was such a disturbing threat of violence outside their residence. Vile displays of Islamophobia will never be tolerated in our city. That's the story? Needless to say, the threat on Saturday came from a diametrically opposed direction. But Lander gave no hint of that, because he's an a-hole, that's why. Neither did Mamdani, who chimed in with the same deception, opening with a denunciation of Lang's bigotry and Islamophobia. He then generically condemned, quote, what followed as being even more disturbing without providing the same sort of specificity regarding the culprits. The hardest thing to see, Goth said, is what is in front of your eyes. Judging by the performance of the media and New York Democrats in the aftermath of this attack, it's even harder for them to tell the truth about what they've actually seen. Now, I'm highlighting this for New York and the entire country here, ladies and gentlemen. This was a terrorist attack that wasn't effectively pulled off. That could have been a horrendous murder scene, maiming scene. And the Democrat Party covered it up with their language. The media in New York covered it up, except for the New York Post. And so when we have issues like zoning in the effort to build basically segregated conclaves or enclaves, where Sharia law rules, where imams are talking about overthrowing the country violently, and we've played a number of those clips, people are not going to hear the truth. They're not going to get the truth from the media, and they're not going to get efforts, depending on where they live, by the ruling class elitists who not only tolerate this and acquiesce to it, but many of them support it.
Mark Levin.
The Great One makes your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
We're a nation at war with ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. We're a nation at war with ourselves. You red-blooded Americans, Mr. and Mrs. America, who are patriots, who love your country. You, me, we are on one side. Elected Democrats in Washington and their operatives, the Marxists, the Islamists, and the woke right neo-fascists are on another side. And it's getting very, very ugly out there. Why would any nation open its borders for a period of, 4 years, to anybody who wants to come in without proper vetting? What nation does that? Ours, under the Democrats. What nation leaves people in the country who shouldn't have been here in the first place, who are dangerous, and then tries to defund the very agency that's trying to track them down and remove them? The Democrats. What nations defund their Coast Guard, which is part of the Navy, certainly during wartime, defunds TSA, which is supposed to keep us safe on all overland transportation, including airlines and trains and bridges? The Democrat Party. What nation undermines itself when it's in the middle of a war against an enemy that wants to blow it off the face of the earth with nuclear weapons? The Democrat Party. You see, I pose it this way: what nation? And then I say the Democrat Party. Because the Democrat Party is dragging down the entire nation as it seeks to grab all power for one-party rule. That's all it cares about. I've told you this before, just like the Communist Party in other countries. The party comes first. The party controls the nation. You and I, we don't believe in committing suicide as a society. But the Democrat Party is doing everything possible to sabotage our country and threatening our very existence. Now, it should be obvious by now that among other targets that Jews and Jewish facilities are being targeted. Whether it's a beatdown in San Jose at a restaurant out of the blue, whether it's chasing Hasidic Jews in New York City, or whether it's driving a vehicle into the headquarters of Chabad in Brooklyn, New York, whether it is shooting 2 staffers to the Israeli embassy, one of whom wasn't Jewish, one of whom clearly was, this young, beautiful couple, whether it was using a homemade flamethrower in an attempt to burn to death mostly elderly people who were protesting on behalf of Israel and against Hamas, one of whom died. When 7 out of every 10 hate crimes in this country is against a tiny minority of the population, Jews, we got a problem. My Christian friends out there understand this. They understand this is an attack that's based on religion and ethnicity. They understand, you understand your link from the Old Testament to the New. And that the effort to destroy the United States of America is an effort to destroy everybody in the United States and America who doesn't abide by the Marxist Islamist ideology. That is what's taking place right now in front of your eyes. They've conquered most of Europe, and now their attention is on the United States of America. And just like the left-wing parties in Europe, the Democrat Party in the United States of America doesn't merely acquiesce to this, it embraces it, because it sees it as its way to one-party rule and control and power. Michael Bouchard, the sheriff in West Bloomfield, and we're going to cover both of these shootings, in Michigan today. Cut 1, go.
Here's what we know so far. A car came to the facility, breached the facility by driving into it, was engaged by security. We believe there is one individual deceased in the vehicle. It's been complicated because there was some fire, to say the least, with that vehicle. We believe that individual is deceased. No kids, this is the important thing, no kids or no staff was injured whatsoever. Okay? So we have no victims other than one of the lead security people was hit by the car and was taken to the hospital for treatment. That individual should be okay. So far, that's our information to this point. We have agencies from all over. Obviously, AETF is here, FBI. More than likely will be taking the lead on this based on some of the preliminary investigative information we have, but we're not going to go into that at this point. But we want to assure the community it doesn't appear to be anything active. We're still clearing the area. We're going to clear vehicles for any explosive devices, the building, etc. Unification of the families and the kids are in progress. We've accounted for everybody that we believe was in the building at the time. So we're on path to continue to maybe pivot to, is there anybody else involved, and the investigative side of what's happened.
So can you confirm that it was security that shot and killed the suspect here?
Well, we can't say what killed him at this point, but security did engage the suspect with gunfire.
Did the suspect have a weapon?
We can't get into a lot of that stuff, but he breached the building, drove down the hall, and he was engaged by security.
So do we know, did he ever fire shots, the suspect?
Preliminarily, we have some information, but nothing that we confirm, so we're not going to go into it.
Where did he breach the building in front?
He drove in through doors with a vehicle.
There was only one person in that vehicle?
That's what it appears at this point.
What do we know about this fire?
Something ignited in the vehicle. That's a work in progress. We're, through an abundance of caution, clearing the vehicle for IEDs or any explosives. We've got a significant number of bomb dogs on site, bomb techs on site. and all of that's going to be done to check the boxes. We have deployed resources all across the county, just in case, out of an abundance of caution, that there may be a secondary site, but we don't have any information at this time to believe that. So we want people to take a breath. No one was hurt. We're on top of it. The chief and his team got here fast. Everything that was supposed to happen happened. Security did their job, and then the responders did theirs.
The terrorist, that car was registered to a naturalized U.S. citizen from Lebanon. That's the terrorist. And we will dig up that name, Mr. Producer. Will you see? I can't find it right now. Will you see if you can? You haven't seen any name yet? Mm-hmm. It's very strange. We will spend the next 3 hours digging for it. I can assure you that. Authorities have now confirmed that a chemical agent was found inside the truck that rammed the Temple Israel in Michigan. Police sources confirmed to Fox's Channel 2 that the chemical agent, which was not identified, indicated that there was an explosive device inside the shooter's vehicle. The shooter, who died on the scene, threw an explosive projectile at the building before opening fire at the house of worship. So, as I understand it, he rams through with his truck, drives down what is a hallway. He is engaged by security. They fire shots. Apparently, he fires shots. There is explosive chemical agent in the car. Either he released that agent, or as a result of the shooting, it blew up. The FBI and hundreds of law enforcement officers raced to Temple Israel in West Bloomfield. Smoke billowed from the building. Apart from the shooter, no further fatalities. And one of the security guards was apparently hurt, but not life-threatening. There's another report that says that the terrorist did, in fact, release an explosive projectile. And obviously they're looking very closely at that. And we're digging for the name. I know what I know, but we're digging for the name. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But I want to shift to another location where there was another attack by a naturalized citizen from Sri Lanka. And this gunman was ID'd with ISIS links. He was in prison. He was let out of prison early by some damnable left-wing judge, no doubt. Even though he was imprisoned for material assistance for terrorism, that's a pretty big deal. Here's Dominique Evans, FBI, Norfolk. Cut 19, go.
I'd like to acknowledge the students who showed extreme bravery and courage by containing the containing the shooter and stopping further loss of life. The FBI is now the lead investigative agency investigating this as an act of terrorism. The shooter has been identified as Mohammed Baylor Jallow. In 2016, Jallow was arrested and pled guilty for attempting to provide material support to ISIL, now known as ISIS. Jallow was sentenced to prison in October of 2017 and was released from prison in 2024. FBI Norfolk's Joint Terrorism Task Force and our evidence response team responded to the scene and will continue to have a physical presence here at the scene as we process the evidence. Additionally, we are conducting other investigative steps into Jallow and the specifics of the shooting. We have dedicated analytical and tactical support. We are aiding in this investigation throughout the entire time. We will continue to work alongside of our partners and those in the community to find answers. The FBI continues to ask for the public's help in providing any information that could lead us in resolving this investigation, and we remind the public that any detail, no matter how small, could be useful. A collection of those small details may help paint a complete picture.
Then cut 20.
I can tell you that we have confirmed reports that prior to him conducting this act of terrorism, he shouted, stated Allahu Akbar, and he was formerly a subject of an FBI investigation in material supporting terrorism.
Allahu Akbar, which means God is most great, and it's used by most Muslims during prayer as a general declaration of faith and thanksgiving.
Mark Levin.
We're giving you nothing but the best of Mark Levin.
We have created the situation we're confronting. Not you and me, of course, but elements of the ruling class elitists. They've created this situation. In both these instances, we're talking about naturalized citizens. That is, theoretically, they were vetted and demonstrated to be qualified to show allegiance to the United States and to assimilate into our country. Now, you know damn well that never happened, and we have tens of thousands of people like that in our country now. We have federal judges without any authority who are now stepping in and preventing the deportation of some of the worst. We have a Democrat Party that looks for any way possible to prevent the apprehension, detention, and removal of people who are here illegally. So vigorous are they in this, so demanding are they that they remain and then become citizens and have a right to vote, and then their children, that they have defunded during a time of war the Coast Guard. They've defunded TSA. You know, you got hours and hours of waits now at these airports, and these poor people, these TSA people, they're not wealthy. Far from it. And the ones who are working there aren't even getting paid. They're not getting paid anything. Just so you know. I don't know what's happening to their health care and all the rest of it. There they are every day. They're heroic, if you ask me, because it's their job to make sure our planes don't blow up after 9/11. Same with customs. And the Democrats are at war with ICE. That's including customs. And they are responsible for bringing millions of these people into our country. As a massive violation of federal immigration law. For their own political benefit. For their own political benefit. Now they refuse to have voter ID. I mean, they're exposing themselves. Now, I've spent, what is this now, March? I've spent 10 months, longer than that, but 10 months focused on exposing Tucker Carlson, on exposing Steve Bannon, on exposing Megyn Kelly, and others. 10 months. I've taken more crap than you can imagine. Mark, you might want to pipe it down. Mark, some of the sponsors don't like this. Mark, some of the PDs don't like this. You think I enjoy it? They don't get threats. I get threats. And I'm not telling you this. I'm not crying on your shoulder. I'm explaining how crucial this is to this nation, let alone the conservative movement and the Constitution. When we have people, day in and day out, reaching millions of young people, trashing our country, trashing our military, trashing our great faiths that created this nation, and now turning on the president. Somebody's got to speak up. More people are, and I want to thank them. But not enough. Not enough of the politicians, not enough of the think tanks, not enough. I said there's sort of a civil war going on in this country. And there is. Those of us who love this country, those of us who've had ancestors build this country, those who are newly here and came here because they want to contribute to the country and have allegiance to the country and want to assimilate into our culture, and then those who were brought here and come here to destroy our country, who demand that we accommodate them, who demand that we surrender our beliefs, our faiths, our country, our way of life to them, whether they be the Marxists or the Islamists. Then we have the Nazi types, the 1930s types, who seek to exploit it all as well. They reject constitutionalism and republicanism. They reject the consent of the governed. They wish to impose their own views on the rest of us. They call themselves nationalists. Well, Hitler called himself a nationalist too. We're not nationalists. We believe in Americanism, federalism, constitutionalism. That's what we believe in. Some people have tried to pervert this whole notion of nationalism into patriotism. It's not patriotism. It's a centralized, iron-fisted police state. We're about the civil society. We're about the sovereignty of the individual. We're about the sovereignty of the United States. Americanism. But here we are today. The forces that have conquered Europe, and yes, Europe is conquered. Europe is done. The left-wing parties embraced and promoted massive immigration. The Islamist entities took maximum advantage of it and exploited it. And now the neo-fascist, neo-Nazi movements in Europe and in our country, they exploit it too. They exploit it too. You have Jews and Jewish institutions that are literally under attack. They can't wear kippahs or yarmulkes, the Star of David, the garb of Hasidic Jews, without fearing for their lives. That's the truth. You have Christian churches, particularly those of the evangelical Christians, that are threatened all the time. I happen to know that from a number of pastors. When they stand up for the notion of supporting our ally, Israel, and when they argue that Scripture compels the Judeo-Christian belief system as united, they're coming under attack. Because these are the things that founded our nation, and these are the things that holds our nation together, ladies and gentlemen. There's a reason why neo-fascists are attracted to Putin in Russia, why they're attracted to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, why, quite frankly, they're attracted to the enemy in Iran. There's a reason for that. And so it's basically you and me, Mr. and Mrs. America. It's us. But there are tens of millions of us. Tens of millions of us who don't believe as the Marxists believe, who don't believe as the Islamists believe, who don't believe as the neo-fascists believe. Eyal Yacobi on X points to a Jewish onliner finds that much of the supposed American backlash to Operation Epic Fury on X, on Twitter, is actually driven by foreign accounts. 7 out of the 10 accounts generating the most interactions about Iran were based outside the United States, and every one of them was negative towards the operation. Among the 100 most viral posts, 60 came from foreign accounts and generated over 155 million views, far more than the U.S.-based posts. Now, this is a movement by China, Russia, by the radicals in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in parts of the Middle East and so forth. This is their propaganda. They're using the social sites. They're using so-called influencers who have no influence. They're using podcasters. Well, every pro-operation post, every one came from an American account. So 70% of the negatives came from foreign accounts. Every pro comes from American accounts. In other words, he says, much of the so-called consensus online is being shaped by foreign amplification. By foreign amplification. So what looks like, writes Eaton Fishberger, like massive American backlash to Operation Epic Fury on X is largely a foreign pile-on. A foreign pile-on. The analysis found that from February 28 to March 7, posts containing the word Iran generated 98 million posts, 696.4 million interactions, and 1.5 trillion potential views. 7 of the 10 accounts generating the most interactions were based outside the United States, and every single one of them was negative toward the operation. Now, the pattern held at the individual post level, too. 7 of the 10 most viral posts were authored by foreign accounts, and all 7 opposed Epic Fury. In a sample of 100 highly viral posts containing the word Iran, with more than 10,000 shares, the 60 foreign origin posts generated about 155.6 million views versus 93.4 million for the 40 U.S.-based posts. That is a reach gap of more than 62 million views on those posts alone. Of the 100 massively viral posts, 90 were hostile to Epic Fury. And notably, every single one of the 10 pro-operation posts came from American posts. In other words, a lot of what users are seeing as supposed consensus is actually being disproportionately shaped by foreign accounts, amplifying anti-U.S. narratives. And now let me go on, because this has a bigger impact than that. And I argued to you, I think it was the other day, 2 days ago, that what you are seeing with a number of these accounts, with rather a number of these podcasters, what you are seeing is that their numbers are also generated largely by foreign accounts, by foreigners who hate America, who hate Christians, who hate Jews, who love Qatar, who love Saudi Arabia, who love Putin, who love Iran. These are the people that, in my view, are mostly generating the numbers for the Tucker Carlsons, for the Bannons, for the Kellys, and all the rest of them, as I pointed out several days ago. And I think this proves it. But politicians are getting the wrong message. In the White House, on Capitol Hill, Republicans, that somehow these so-called podcasters are influencers. They're influencers with the enemy overseas who hate our country, hate our Judeo-Christian belief system. They're influencers with them, but not with America. But, of course, the media picked this up and run with it because they hate Trump, and they're also undermining you and me. And by the way, I would like one individual at Mediaite to understand, patriotic people on the right are taking on Tucker and company. I've been doing it for a long time. I've been taking a lot of pushback on this. But they don't listen to radio, a lot of these guys. They just don't.